The morning light came through the hospital window in thin, pale strips, and I remember thinking it looked nothing like the golden hour I had imagined for this moment. I had pictured warmth. I had pictured his hand in mine. Instead, I was watching my husband straighten his tie in the small mirror above the sink, checking his reflection with the same careful attention he gave to everything that mattered to him, which I was learning did not include me. "You're really doing this," I said. My voice was flat, not angry yet, just trying to understand. He turned around and there it was. That smile, the one that used to make me feel chosen. Now it just made me feel managed. "Victoria," he said, patient the way you are with someone who doesn't quite understand. "This dinner has been on the calendar for 4 months. The Harrington account. You know what closing this means for us." Us. He said us. I had just spent 31 hours in labor. The epidural had worn off twice. I had torn badly enough to need stitches. And I had done all of it, every single hour of it, while my husband sat in the waiting room taking work calls. I know, because the nurse mentioned it gently, the way people mention things they find shameful on your behalf. Our daughter was 6 hours old. She was asleep in the bassinet beside my bed, her tiny fists curled under her chin, her whole existence still so new that the hospital band on her ankle looked enormous. And my husband was leaving for a client dinner. "The car," I said. "At least leave me the car so my mother can drive us home tomorrow." He paused. That pause told me everything before his words did. I needed to make the right impression pulling up. You know how Harrington is about details. He picked up his jacket from the chair. "I already called the car service for you and the baby. It's handled." He kissed my forehead. He smelled like the cologne I had bought him for Christmas. He walked out the door and I listened to his footsteps fade down the corridor. And then I looked at my daughter and I felt something in my chest go very, very quiet. Not breaking, deciding. I reached for my phone and I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always has my whole life, every time I have ever needed him. "Dad," I said, "I need you." He didn't ask questions. He said, "I'm already getting my keys." My father's name is Richard Calloway. He is 63 years old. He built a commercial real estate firm from nothing, starting with one property in downtown Charlotte when he was 26 years old, and he now owns 42 buildings across the Southeast. He's quiet in the way that powerful people sometimes are, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned that words are expensive and silence is often the sharper tool. He has never liked my husband. He never said so directly that was not his way. But I remember the look on his face at our wedding reception when my husband made a toast that was somehow more about his own ambitions than about me. And my father had raised his glass and smiled. And afterward, I had caught him standing alone by the window, looking out at the garden with an expression I couldn't read at the time. I could read it now. His name is Daniel Mercer. We met 4 years ago at a fundraising gala. He was charming and sharp and laughed at exactly the right moments, and he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. Later, I would understand that this was a skill he had practiced, not a feeling he had possessed. But at the time, I was 30 years old and had spent most of my adult life being taken seriously for everything except my heart. And Daniel made me feel like both were possible at once. We dated for 14 months. He proposed on a rooftop in Savannah, which was my favorite city, which he knew because I had told him, and I had thought, he listens. He pays attention. He is the kind of man who remembers. We were married 18 months later. My father walked me down the aisle with his hand steady under mine. And at the edge of the altar, he leaned in and whispered, "You can always come home, no matter what. You remember that?" I thought it was just a father being sentimental. I know now it was a man who already saw something I didn't want to see. The first year was mostly good, or good enough that I didn't stop to examine it too closely. Daniel worked in corporate acquisitions. He traveled. He was ambitious in the way I had always found attractive, until ambition started to feel less like drive and more like an appetite that nothing could fill, including me. The second year, things started moving in ways I couldn't quite name. He began asking about my father's properties, casually at first over dinner, in the way you ask about something you're merely curious about. Then with more focus, he started mentioning investment opportunities, deals, and structures I only half understood. I was an architect. I designed buildings. I did not manage portfolios. And Daniel knew that I didn't ask the right questions. That is the thing I come back to most. In the quiet hours, I didn't ask the right questions because I didn't want to believe the answers that were already forming. My father did ask questions. I know this because Daniel mentioned it once, tightly, after a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Your father had a lot to say about the Henderson property structure, he said in the car on the way home. He's very detail-oriented. He's careful, I said. That's how he built what he built. Daniel said nothing. He looked at the road, and I felt the first cold edge of something I told myself was nothing. When I got pregnant, I hoped. That is an embarrassing thing to admit now, but it is true. I hoped a child would settle something in him. I hoped it would rearrange his priorities the way pregnancy had rearranged mine, quietly and completely, so that everything I thought I wanted had reorganized itself around this new fact of her. Instead, the pregnancy seemed to make him busier, more distracted, more interested in the firm, and numbers and structures I wasn't part of. He came to the prenatal appointments. He was present enough, but there was a quality to his presence that felt like performance, like a man who understood that showing up was important without fully understanding why. The night my contractions started, I called him 3 times before he answered. He was at a work event. He arrived at the hospital 90 minutes later, still in his suit, and the first thing he said was not, "Are you okay?" but, "How long do they think this will take?" 31 hours later, our daughter was born. He cut the cord. He held her for 6 minutes. I counted. And then he put her back in my arms and sat down with his phone. And 6 hours after that, he left for a client dinner. My father arrived at the hospital before visiting hours the next morning. He brought my mother flowers from their garden and a container of the chicken soup I had loved since childhood. He sat in the chair beside my bed and held his granddaughter for a long time without speaking. And then he looked at me with clear, steady eyes. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I told him about the dinner, about the car, about the 31 hours, about the work calls in the waiting room, about the question of how long this would take. And I told him the other things, the things I had been carrying for longer, the conversations about the properties, the structures I hadn't understood, the deals that seemed to circle my father's firm without ever landing anywhere I could examine clearly. My father listened without interrupting. He set his granddaughter down gently in my arms when she began to stir, and he leaned back in his chair, and he was quiet for a moment that felt very long. "Victoria," he said finally, "I need to tell you some things I should have told you sooner." He had been watching Daniel for 2 years, not with any dramatic surveillance. My father was not that kind of man, but with the careful attention of someone who manages significant assets and noticed slowly that certain numbers weren't adding up. A property investment Daniel had mentioned at dinner that didn't match any structure my father recognized. A shell company that appeared in a document his lawyer flagged as unusual. A pattern of interest in transactions that would require access to information Daniel should not have had access to. He had not told me because he did not have proof, and because he was afraid of what I would do before he did. "I have it now," he said. "My lawyers have been working on it for 3 months. We have wire transfers, forged signatures on 2 documents related to the Henderson acquisition, and a shell account in Delaware that appears to have been receiving diverted funds." He paused. "Your husband has been using your marriage and your connection to my firm to commit financial fraud slowly, carefully, in ways he believed I would not notice." I looked at my daughter in my arms. She was asleep again, her breath so small and steady it was almost impossible. "How much?" I said. He told me. The number was significant. Not enough to touch what my father had built, but significant and calculated. The kind of theft that is designed to stay below the threshold of obvious detection. "The prenuptial agreement we signed," I said, "covers all of this and triggers a full forensic audit of any jointly held assets." He looked at me. "If you want to move forward." I thought about the tie, the mirror, the smile, the cologne, the footsteps fading down the corridor while our daughter was 6 hours old. "Call the lawyers," I said. My father nodded once. He reached for his phone. By the time Daniel returned to the hospital the following afternoon, later than he'd said he would, with no explanation offered, he was greeted not by the recovery room I had been in, but by a different room, a private one my father had arranged. And inside that room, along with me and my daughter, were my father's lead attorney, and a woman named Susan Park, who specialized in matrimonial law and forensic asset recovery, and who had driven from Atlanta that morning. Daniel stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved around the room with a fast, Assessing quality, I had always mistaken for intelligence. Now I recognized it as calculation. "Victoria," he said. "What is this?" "Please sit down, Daniel," Susan said. He looked at me. I held my daughter, and I did not look away from him. He sat. What followed was 2 hours that I will not describe in full because some of it is still in legal process, but I will tell you the shape of it. Susan walked him through the evidence. My father's attorney outlined the prenuptial provisions and what they triggered. Daniel denied everything at first, with a composure I found almost impressive, until Susan placed the Delaware account documents on the table in front of him and something in his face shifted. He tried several things after that. He appealed to me directly across the table with an expression I had seen before, the chosen look, the attentive look, the look that used to make me feel found. I felt nothing except a kind of sad clarity, like recognizing the mechanism inside a clock. He suggested the documents were misinterpreted. Susan explained why they were not. He said he had done everything for us, for our family, for our future. I thought of 31 hours and 6 minutes of holding, and a client dinner on the calendar for 4 months. He said I was making a mistake. My father, who had been silent for most of this, looked at him calmly and said, "Every decision has already been made. The accounts have been frozen as of this morning. The locks at the Brookhaven house were changed at 7 a.m. Your personal items have been placed with the building concierge. Susan will walk you through the agreement." Daniel looked at my father for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "You're really doing this?" he said. Those were the same words I had said to him 30 hours earlier in a hospital room while he straightened his tie. I didn't answer him. I looked down at my daughter, who was awake now, her dark eyes unfocused the way newborns are, finding her way toward the world. "Yes," I said, to her mostly to myself. "We are." The legal process took time, as these things do. The fraud case was referred to federal prosecutors, which removed a great deal from my hands and placed it where it belonged. The prenuptial agreement performed exactly as my father's lawyers had written it to perform, which was a testament to the kind of careful, unglamorous preparation that protects people when things fall apart. I moved back into my parents' house for the first 3 months. Not because I couldn't manage alone, but because my mother made soup and my father read to his granddaughter every evening in the armchair by the window, his voice low and steady. And I needed to be somewhere that felt like evidence that love could be reliable. I named her Clara, my grandmother's name. She has my father's eyes. The Harrington account, as it turned out, had nothing to do with a client named Harrington. There was no Harrington. There was a restaurant booking, and a woman I recognized from a company event, and a credit card statement that Susan's team found during the forensic audit. I was not surprised. I was, in some ways, almost relieved. Not that it had happened, but that the architecture of the deception was complete enough to understand. There is something worse, I think, about a betrayal you can only partially see. My father never said, "I told you so." He would not. Instead, one evening when Clara was asleep and my mother had gone upstairs and we were sitting on the back porch in the particular quiet that Charlotte gets in late October, he said, "You handled all of it with more grace than it deserved." "I learned from someone," I said. He smiled at his coffee. "You always were the one who paid attention." I went back to architecture. I had taken a leave during the pregnancy, and I returned to the firm on a Thursday in November. My colleagues were kind in the careful way of people who know something difficult has happened and respect you enough not to make it into a topic. I was grateful for that. I was grateful for a lot of things I had not known how to value before. I designed a residential project that winter, a house for a family in Asheville, built into the side of a hill with large south-facing windows and a layout that centered on the kitchen, where the family had told me they spent most of their time together. I thought a great deal about what it means to build something that holds people, about structures that are honest about what they're for. Clara is 8 months old now. She sits up on her own and is very interested in my father's watch and has the specific, concentrated seriousness of someone studying the world with intent. She sleeps well. She is in every visible way completely unaware that her life began with a kind of rupture, and I am glad for that. That unawareness is something I am working to preserve for as long as I can, and then, when the time comes, to replace it with the truth in a form she can carry without it being too heavy. I did not hate my husband. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier and more satisfying for a story if I did. Mostly, I felt grief for the version of him I had believed in. For the years I had organized around a person who was, underneath the charm and the smile and the careful attention, mostly interested in what I represented rather than who I was. But I also felt something else, something that took me longer to name: free. I felt free. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of free. The quiet kind. The kind that comes when you stop spending energy on something that was never going to hold, and you feel the weight of it lift, and you realize how long you had been carrying it by the particular lightness that comes after. My father called me 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday. He said he was calling for no reason, which meant he was calling for a reason. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Are you okay?" "Not managing." "Not fine." "Okay." I thought about it. Clara was on the floor in front of me, very focused on a wooden spoon she had found, turning it over in her hands with intense concentration. "Yes," I said. "I think I actually am." He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. "Then she's going to be remarkable. You know, Clara, she already has that look." "What look?" "The one where she knows exactly what she's looking at." A pause. "You had it too. Still do." I looked at my daughter and her spoon, and the late afternoon light coming through the window at the angle I had specifically designed this room to catch. And I thought about what it means to see clearly, about how long it can take to learn, and about how the learning is not wasted even when the cost of it is high. "Thanks, Dad," I said. "Always," he said and hung up. Some mornings, I wake up early before Clara, before the city fully starts, and I sit at the drafting table in my home office with coffee and whatever project I'm working on. The apartment is so quiet I can hear the building settle around me. I used to find that sound unsettling. That's the thing about silence. It takes on the color of whatever you're carrying. These days, it sounds like the future, like a foundation that was built right,